You're walking down a dirt road in York County, Pennsylvania. It's late November. The trees are mostly bare now. You can see clear through them in every direction, but that doesn't make it feel safer, just more exposed. There's a farmhouse up ahead, old, 2 stories, the kind that's been added onto over the years. One light in the window. No smoke from the chimney. It's quiet. Inside that house, a man named Nelson Rehmeyer is about to die. He's not a criminal, not a stranger. He's lived here a long time, and people know him. Call him when their cows get sick or when their babies won't stop crying. They say he can pull fever, break a hex, heal what regular doctors can't touch. They also say he keeps a book, something old, something powerful, the kind of thing you don't leave out when company's over. But tonight, company's coming, and they aren't there for healing. 3 men walk through that front door. One of them's just a kid. Another's named John Blymeyer. And he's got it in his head that Nelson Rehmeyer is the reason his life's gone wrong. They sit at the kitchen table. They talk. They eat. Then something shifts. The men turn violent. Rehmeyer is beaten, the body left on the floor. They try to set the house on fire, to finish what they started, to destroy whatever power they think he held. But the fire doesn't take, so they run. It's 1928. There are radios in the living rooms, phones on the walls. But out here in the hills, powwow, the old Pennsylvania Dutch folk healing, is still alive. And where there's healing, there's also fear. Because if someone can use a Bible verse to stop your bleeding, you figure someone else can use one to make you sick. That's the balance and the logic, and that's where this murder starts. I'm Papa G, and this is the Feral Folklorist, and today we're digging into the hex murder of York County, where folk magic, paranoia, and violence met in one man's kitchen and left a stain that never fully came out. By the time Nelson Rehmeyer was killed, powwow wasn't some fringe tradition. It was part of everyday life in parts of Pennsylvania, especially in the rural German-speaking communities, now lumped together as the Pennsylvania Dutch. The name's a little misleading. They weren't Dutch, they were Dutch-German. Most were Protestant, Lutheran, Reformed, sometimes Brethren, and when they came to America, they brought their folk practices with them. One of those practices was hexerei, which came to be known in English as powwow. That term came from the Algonquin word for a healer or shaman, picked up along the way by English speakers and repurposed. But the system itself, deeply European, Christian, rooted in the Bible, but shaped by almanacs, herbal knowledge, protective prayers, and everyday superstition. The powwow doctor wasn't ordained. He didn't wear robes. He worked out of a kitchen or a barn. He had a Bible, some handwritten notes, maybe a family grimoire, and he probably had a copy of a book called The Long Lost Friend. That book was everywhere, published in 1820 by a German-American named John George Homan. It was a part recipe book, part spell book, part spiritual survival guide. It had prayers for protection, instructions for stopping bleeding. There were charms for catching thieves and ways to remove curses. and a whole lot of it what we now call folk magic. But at the time, it wasn't seen that way. It was Christian. It quoted scripture. And for people in those communities, it worked. If your child had a fever, you called the doctor. But if your cows went dry, or your husband couldn't sleep, or you saw something strange out in the woods, you called the powwow man. Nelson Rehmeyer was that man. Lived in a place called Rehmeyer's Hollow. He worked with herbs and prayers and charms, and he didn't advertise what he did. He didn't brag about it. He just helped people when they asked him to. And for most of his life, that was enough. But in these kinds of traditions, power isn't just admired, it's also feared. Because if someone can heal, they can harm. If they can bless, they can curse. If they can take away illness, they can just as easily put it there. And that's what people like John Blymeyer started to believe. Now, Blymeyer was raised in powwow. He came from a family that believed in it, practiced it. He knew the signs, the prayers, the structure. But from a young age, he was convinced something wasn't right. He'd been sick a lot as a child. Nothing specific, just sickly and weak. He was an unlucky kid. And someone told him early on that he'd been hexed. Not cursed exactly, but crossed, spiritually blocked. And that belief followed him into adulthood. So he tried powwow himself, tried to learn it, tried to use it to lift whatever was dogging him. But it didn't work. His life didn't get better. He stayed poor. He stayed anxious. Couldn't keep a job. Started seeing bad luck everywhere he went. And instead of questioning the belief itself, he doubled down on it. Started thinking more seriously about who might have cursed him. So he started asking around. Another powwow worker told him he was still under a hex and that he'd never be free until he identified the one who laid it on him. They also gave him a remedy, a reversal spell. So according to that source, Blymeyer needed to find the hexer's spellbook, get a lock of their hair, and destroy them together, either by fire or burial. That would, in theory, break the connection and sever the spiritual influence. So it's worth noting that this is not unheard of in folk magic, but there are rules and boundaries. There's consent and discernment, and Blymeyer wasn't interested in any of that. He decided the person who hexed him was Nelson Rehmeyer. Why is not entirely clear. Maybe he'd had a bad encounter with him, or maybe it was something he said, or maybe Rehmeyer was just the most visible powwow doctor in the area, the most obvious target. What we do know is that Blymeyer became convinced that Rehmeyer hexed him, and that the only way to lift it was to destroy the source of power. He didn't plan to go alone. He brought two others, a young man named John Curry and a teenager named Milton Hess. Both were from the same area. Both had had their own streaks of bad luck, and both apparently were open to the idea that Rehmeyer was to blame. So together they made a plan. They would go to the farmhouse, confront Rehmeyer, find the book and the hair, and destroy them. They didn't plan a murder, at least not officially. But they did bring rope and matches. And on the night of November 27th, 1928, they walked into Rehmeyer's home. He let them in. This part is always striking. He fed them. He talked with them. He treated them like they were his guests. So there's no report of a fight, no shouting, just a slow rift in energy until the tension snapped and something changed. And then they beat him. Rehmeyer was 59 years old. He was pretty sturdy, but he was outnumbered. He died on his kitchen floor. Now, they tried to burn the body to complete the ritual to make sure the power was gone, but the fire barely caught. The house smoked, but it didn't ignite, so they ran. This murder shocked York County. It wasn't just brutal, it was strange. The motive wasn't money or passion. It was magic. That made it harder to talk about. Local papers called it the hex slaying. The public latched onto the idea that this was an old world superstition bubbling up in the modern day. It was something out of time, something embarrassing. The police investigated rather quickly, and all three men were arrested and confessed. Explained they were trying to break a curse, but none of it worked as a defense. In 1929, Rehmeyer was sentenced to life in prison. Curry and Hess got long sentences too, but over time, all three were released. And the case stayed with the community. Rehmeyer's Hollow became synonymous with fear. The house itself still stands. Some say it's haunted. Some say the air feels different there. The kind of heavy air that makes you speak softly when you walk by it. So after the murder, powwow didn't disappear. It just got a little quieter. People didn't advertise it. They didn't talk about it outside of trusted circles because now it wasn't just a private practice. It was dangerous. Admitting you worked powwow meant you could be accused of causing harm, or worse. Nelson Rehmeyer didn't die because he cursed anyone. He died because someone believed he did, and that belief was enough. Now let's be honest about something. This story gets passed around like it's just old superstition gone sideways. 3 bumpkins believe in magic, went too far and killed a man. And sure, that's one version. But if you stop there, you miss the real lesson. Because this isn't just a cautionary tale about folk belief. It's a warning about what happens when magical thinking gets detached from magical discipline. So let's talk about that. Because powwow as a system isn't the problem here. It's not aggressive. It's not built for harm. It's rooted in protection, healing, and balance. It's a Bible-based folk magic with psalms and symbols and spoken words and really strong faith behind it. At its core, powwow is about restoring what's out of alignment. You're not attacking someone. You're untangling a knot. You're not fighting darkness. You're calling things back to the right order. But like any magical system, it can be misunderstood. And when that happens, when fear walks in the door, healing can get twisted into harm really fast. What John Blymeyer did was a powwow. He used the structure, the language, the gestures, but not the core of it. He skipped the discernment. He skipped the divination and every safeguard that's put in place. So he didn't confirm the source of his troubles. He didn't ground himself. He didn't cleanse or pray or even make sure what he was doing was justified. He went straight to blame. And that's the part that matters the most. Because magical work, real magical work, requires accountability. You don't get to skip the inner work and still call it a spell. Now, let's talk about that ritual, the one Blymeyer was trying to do. Burning someone's spellbook and a lock of their hair to break their power, that isn't a real unhexing. It isn't a real working. It exists in powwow. It exists in hoodoo. It shows up in European folk magic too. But here's the catch. You don't just do that to someone you suspect. It's not a casual move. It's a serious spiritual warfare, and only justified when there's clear, confirmed harm and no other path to go down. And even then, most traditions would tell you protect yourself first. Block, cleanse, bind. You only go offensive when every other door is shut. What Blymeyer did wasn't strategy. It wasn't defense. It was panic dressed up like a ritual. So there's a pattern here, and it still shows up today. People say, I think I'm cursed, or I've got bad luck and I know who did it. I need a reversal spell to get this person off of me. Okay, maybe, but what they need to do is slow down and ask themselves, are you really cursed? Or are you making bad decisions and then suffering the consequences of them? Are you under spiritual attack? Or are you simply burned out and anxious and waiting for something external to explain it all? Because if you start casting against people without checking your own reflection first, that's not folk magic, that's projection. Here's what we know from practice. Yes, cross conditions are real, and hexing does exist. And yes, sometimes you've got to do a spell to clear someone else's influence off you. But you don't start there. You start with the cleansing. You start with divination. You start with, is this mine or is this fear doing the talking? You don't jump straight to war. You don't light a match until you've done your homework. So the other piece of the story is Rehmeyer himself. He wasn't flashy. He didn't advertise. He didn't pull attention. He just did his work. He did it quietly, consistently, and with the kind of focus that tends to make people nervous when they just don't understand it. And that's the hard truth about folk magic in any tradition. When you help people, you also draw suspicion. Because if they think you can fix things, they'll also assume you can break them. You're a healer until someone's cow dies or their luck turns bad. Then you become a suspect. This tension is ancient. It shows up in every culture that has a magical class. The village wise woman or the midwife, the herb doctor. Rehmeyer didn't cause Blymeyer's pain, but he was the nearest person who understood power, and that made him a target. From a magical perspective, this whole thing is a lesson in what not to do. You don't take someone's hair and book without consent, and you don't burn spiritual tools just because you think they're causing harm, and you don't treat belief like a weapon. Magic is not therapy. It's not a shortcut for dealing with your life. And if you use it to justify paranoia or fear, you're going to get consequences. Not because spirits are vengeful, but because you created the mess. And the energy you stir up has to land somewhere. There's a reason so many spiritual traditions have rules, not to gatekeep or to be mystical. It's to keep you from hurting yourself or someone else out of desperation. A reversal spell is a powerful thing, but it's not meant for punishment. It's meant for release. And if you don't know the difference, you shouldn't be doing it. So here's the takeaway. Belief is powerful, but belief without discipline is chaos. If you're going to work folk magic, you need more than candles and courage. You need clarity. You need responsibility. And you need to be honest about whether you're acting from faith or from fear. Because when you work from fear, you don't break curses. You just make new ones. There's still something strange about that house. Rehmeyer's place, what's left of it, still stands in York County. You can visit it, technically. Some folks do. Others say they wouldn't walk up that road after dark if you paid them. Not because there's some big haunting. There's no ghost dragging chains in the rafters. It's quieter than that. More like the house remembers what happened. People who've been there say the air still feels heavy. It's still, this kind of stillness that makes you lower your voice without meaning to. The kitchen, the room where it happened, it feels off to some. Not in this cinematic way, no cold spot or obvious presence, just that feeling like you're not supposed to be in there for too long. It's like the room is sizing you up. Some say they smell smoke, faint but sharp, even though the fire never really caught. And others talk about feeling watched, not from the windows, but from the corners. One woman said her watch stopped ticking the second she walked in. Started up again when she walked across the threshold on the way out the door. Could be coincidence, probably was, but in places like that, coincidence stacks up quickly. It's not a loud haunting. It's a memory that has settled into the floorboards and sort of stayed there. A few years after the murder, some of the neighbors started saying they'd seen Rehmeyer near the property line at dusk. Not as a ghost exactly, not glowing or see-through, just there, walking with his shoulders hunched, not looking at anyone. One woman said her mother would leave a bowl of milk near the tree line every year on the anniversary of his death. Not because she thought he was thirsty, but, in her words, there's a part of him that didn't leave, and it shouldn't be left out in the cold. Now that's like folk logic. It's not dramatic, and it's not really performative. It's just out of respect. It's this habit in folk magic. You don't have to believe in ghosts to know when a place wants to be treated right. But the real weight of the story doesn't sit in the walls of the house. It sits in the idea that belief can kill. That someone's spiritual work meant to help can be turned against them in someone else's mind. That part isn't folklore, and that part still happens. Especially in folk communities where healing and harm sit too close together and where fear spreads faster than facts. In old Pennsylvania Dutch lore, there were stories of people who tried to break hexes and ended up worse off than they were before. One man had said tried to burn a charm he thought was cursing him. And his barn caught fire that same week. No one could say for sure what caused it, but he never touched the charm again. And there's another tale about a young woman who falsely accused her neighbor of hexing her. Claimed her chickens wouldn't lay, her hair was falling out. Turns out she'd been using spoiled feed and washing with well water full of iron. And when the truth came out, she started losing business, then friends. Folks said the accusation rebounded. It wasn't justice, it was magical law. What you send out comes back to you. And that's what lingers more than any ghost story. The understanding that if you point a finger in magical spaces without proof, without prayer, without discernment, you're the one taking the risk. You can cleanse and you can protect. You can ask others for guidance. But once you accuse, you better be sure. Because if you're wrong, if you burn the wrong name or bury the wrong book or pull the wrong thread, you don't just call harm down on them. you might end up calling it down on yourself. And you might not even realize it until it's too late. The hex murder of York County, it's a case where someone misread the signs. They believed their own fear and acted without wisdom. And that the spirit that still lingers there, it's not Rehmeyer. It's the fear that turned healing into a reason for violence. It's the echo of what happens when someone says, I've been cursed, and doesn't bother to ask, am I sure? And that's the part that still walks the property line. Just the slow, heavy silence of something that should have never happened. The hex murder of York County wasn't about magic gone wrong. Nelson Rehmeyer wasn't killed because he cast a spell. He was killed because someone thought he did and never bothered to check. That's the danger. Not the spell book, not the Bible verse, but the fear that takes root when you don't understand what's happening and decide it must be someone else's fault. Now, we've talked plenty about curses and folk magic, how they work, how to undo them. But this time we're going to flip it. Because fear of being cursed can be just as dangerous as any hex itself. So let's close out with our spell section and talk about two different things. We're going to do a spell to break cross conditions without retaliation, and one for practitioners, those of us who do this work and still live under the weight of being misunderstood. So spell 1 is breaking cross conditions without retaliation. And the purpose is to clear a spiritual heaviness. We're going to get rid of bad luck, crossed up energy, without projecting blame or causing any harm to others. What you'll need is 1 black candle, a bowl of water with a pinch of salt, just a small amount of hyssop or rue or rosemary, and a photo of yourself or your name written on a piece of paper. The first thing you do is light the black candle with an intention behind it. You set the bowl of salted water in front of you and place your photo or name beneath it. Stir the water 3 times clockwise with your fingers, saying, "What clings, release. What clouds, clear. What was sent, return to sender in peace." You then use that water to anoint your forehead, the back of your hands, and the soles of your feet. You then burn the paper or bury it at the edge of your property, facing away from the home. And you do this 3 days in a row as the moon wanes. So this isn't revenge work, it's release work. You're not naming other names other than yourself, so there's no targets. It's just a firm reminder that your spirit is yours. And the next one we're going to do is a charm to protect healers and magical workers. And this is to reflect suspicion or false blame or spiritual projection, especially if you work openly as a healer or a reader or a root worker. And you will need a small mirror, like a little pocket-sized mirror, a piece of black cloth, a pinch of salt, and a short blessing or psalm. Depending on your religious preference, it could be any sort of blessing. If you want to use a psalm, Psalm 91 is traditional. And you place the mirror in the center of the cloth, shiny side up. Sprinkle a line of salt around the edges of the mirror and speak your name and say, "Let false words fall away. Let confusion turn back. May I be seen clearly and stand in the work that is mine." And then you fold the cloth inward with the mirror still inside, wrapped in the cloth, and then you keep it on your altar or near your front door. So if things get tense, like clients are projecting things on you or they're accusing you of things, you hold that wrapped mirror and repeat your blessing, and you sleep with it under your pillow. So you're not cursing, you're clarifying. Folk magic doesn't separate power from responsibility. If you're going to walk this path, powwow, conjure, root work, any of it, you've got to know your boundaries. You've got to be clear about what's yours. And you've got to be damn sure before you ever name another person as your problem. Nelson Rehmeyer didn't die because his magic is dangerous. He died because someone used belief as a shortcut for doing the real work. And if there's one lesson left standing in that kitchen, it's this. Magic has rules. Fear doesn't. I'm Papa G, and this has been the Feral Folklorist. Next time we're going to New Orleans. We'll talk about graveyard magic, offerings, and the spiritual legacy of Marie Laveau, why her tomb became an altar, and what it means to work with the dead in a city that never forgets them. So until then, keep your name and your reputation clean, and don't mistake fear for faith. If you'd like to hear the After the Show episode where I go deeper into the folklore, spill a little extra dirt, and sometimes rant just a bit, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. You can find the official site for the podcast at feralfolklorist.com. And if you need spell supplies for any of the workings we talk about on the show, our metaphysical shop, Aromagees Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromagees.com.